He left the wife who had sacrificed her youth to build a life with him, just for a woman with money and power. And when everything came crashing down, he finally realized, some things, once lost, can never be found again. Emma and Michael got married when they had nothing. They met at the Austin Public Library, not in some romantic way, just two strangers who happened to pick the same quiet corner. But that silent space became the starting point for a noisy life together. Emma came from a working-class family in the suburbs of Dallas. She had been studying education, but dropped out in her final year to start working because her mom was sick, her younger brother needed tuition money, and Michael, who was still struggling through his MBA, needed something to lean on. Michael was different. He was the textbook definition of working his way up. No drinking, no gambling, no partying. A classic kind of man, clear-headed, steady, and moral. He worked at a Chevron gas station during the day, went to school at night, and delivered pizzas for Domino's on the weekends. They got married in the backyard of Emma's oldest sister, in a simple but warm ceremony. The 3-tier wedding cake came from Costco, the chairs were rented from a flea market, and their wedding photos were taken, free of charge, by one of Michael's old classmates. They moved into a small apartment in South Austin, a neighborhood with lots of trees, but not much light. It was a 1-bedroom unit with an old air conditioner and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. They didn't have much: a second-hand sofa set, a tiny kitchen, and a fridge that snored like an old man every night. But they had each other, and they had faith that every bit of effort would someday be worth it. Michael got up early every morning to make coffee for both of them before heading out at 6 a.m. He'd leave little notes on the kitchen table. "Friday I'll get off early. Let's eat at El Camino," or "Umbrellas in the trunk. If it rains this afternoon, just grab it." Emma, even though she worked full-time at a nail salon called Nail Bar & Co., was still the one who cooked dinner every night. She kept it simple: pasta, chicken soup, or grilled meat, but Michael never once complained. On the contrary, he always said, "Anything you make is good, as long as you made it." They had a habit of eating dinner together, even if it was just for 20 minutes between shifts. And every Saturday night, if they weren't too exhausted, they'd rewatch an old movie, usually a romantic comedy or a Hitchcock mystery. Michael liked the plot twists. Emma liked the quiet details, the looks, the gestures, the unspoken moments that didn't need any dialogue. When Michael graduated with his MBA from the University of Texas, Emma sat in the front row. She didn't cry. She just clapped a little longer than everyone else. She knew how far he had come from where he started, and she had walked every step of that road with him, never once falling behind. He landed a job at a financial consulting firm. It was an entry-level position, but a solid stepping stone. His schedule got packed, but he still kept the habit of making coffee every morning, even if it meant just leaving a cup on the table and heading out before Emma woke up. On weekends, they still drove out to the suburbs near San Antonio to visit Emma's mom. They still grabbed coffee at a little shop called Daisy Brew and took walks in Zilker Park, the place where they had their first date. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was full in its own way. No one cheated, no one kept secrets. No one gave up, and maybe, because everything seemed fine, no one saw it coming, that the rest wouldn't be. Just when everything seemed stable, a small shift in Michael's job set off a chain of changes Emma never saw coming. Michael got promoted. From financial analyst, he was bumped up to project director, a key role in a major partnership deal between his firm and a real estate conglomerate from New York. The representative from the partner company was Victoria Stone, a well-known name in the high-end real estate world. 48, twice divorced, no kids, wealthy, sharp, and never one to fail at getting people to listen. She made her first appearance at a strategic meeting at Michael's office, flanked by her personal assistant and carrying a white Hermes bag worth nearly a full year's salary for the average employee. Michael told Emma about Victoria like she was just an interesting figure at work. "She's got a sharp strategic mind. You should hear her talk about risk analysis. I've learned a lot." Emma listened, nodded, and didn't think much of it. She trusted Michael. He had never given her a reason not to. The following week, Victoria invited Michael to dinner to go over some project details in private. The place? the Peninsula Steakhouse, a high-end restaurant in downtown Austin where a steak cost 10 times what he and Emma usually spent on dinner. Michael wore a new dress shirt and cologne with a deep woody scent, not his usual. Emma noticed, but only asked gently, "Is the whole team going?" Michael replied, "Just me." She said, "This needs someone who can make decisions." That dinner ended at 11 p.m. Michael texted Emma before heading home, "Just left the restaurant. Let's talk tomorrow. I'm a bit tired." He didn't mention that Victoria had been drinking, had asked about his marriage, or that she had lightly touched his wrist when he laughed. In the weeks that followed, Victoria became a constant presence. Zoom meetings, in-person meetings, working lunches, late afternoon coffees. She sent Michael a Mont Blanc fountain pen in a leather case with a note, "Good work needs good tools." Michael brought the pen home and placed it on his desk without saying a word. Emma started to feel something. Not jealousy, more like unease. She couldn't quite put her finger on what was changing, but she could feel it. Things weren't the same. Michael began leaving for work earlier, coming home later. He bought a few new suits, started hitting the gym every morning, and signed up for a premium facial care package at a high-end spa. He used to be the kind of guy who didn't care much about looks, just clean and tidy was enough. But now he insisted, men need to present themselves professionally too. In today's world, people judge by appearance first. Hold up. Stop for 3 seconds. Guys listening, let me ask you something. If a man suddenly starts working out, changes his cologne, upgrades his suits, and restyles his hair, and he's not doing it to impress the woman he's already with, then who's he doing it for? Exactly. He's in love. But not with the one at home. I don't know about you, but to me, that's not normal. Back to the story. One evening, Emma saw him spraying cologne Tom Ford's cedarwood scent, one she'd never seen him use before. She asked, "Is that a new one?" He answered, "Victoria gave it to me, said it suits me." That reply, short, casual, tightened something in Emma's chest. They still had dinner together, still split the bills, still watched movies on weekends. But something was missing. A look that didn't linger, a story told without spark, a silence that had no name. Michael started saying things like, "Independent women are really attractive," or "Not everyone's strong enough to stand on their own." He'd say it without looking at Emma, and maybe that, more than any lie, was what scared her most. Emma didn't say anything. She didn't ask, didn't snoop, didn't check his phone or his wallet. She just sat still and started listening more closely to the things that were never said out loud. She didn't confront him. No accusations, no shouting, no tears. But that didn't mean she didn't see what was happening. People say change starts with the smallest things, and lately, Michael seemed to be nothing but a string of small changes. He started coming home late. Stopped texting, "On my way." Stopped asking, "Have you eaten?" One night, when he walked through the door, he passed her like they were just two people sharing an apartment, not a married couple who'd spent nearly a decade together. Emma didn't complain. She just glanced at the clock and quietly cleared the cold dishes off the table. The conversations that used to stretch through dinner were now replaced by silence. Michael used to talk about meetings, difficult clients, funny coworkers. Now every question from Emma got the same short replies. "It's fine. Nothing much. Just normal." One time, when Emma brought up having kids, something they were both excited about just last year, Michael brushed it off. Now's not the time. No explanation, no promises. Gone was the spark in his eyes whenever he used to talk about becoming a dad. That night, Michael turned his back when they went to bed. Emma lay beside him, staring into the darkness between them. He used to pull her close, no matter how tired he was. Now there was only the soft whir of the ceiling fan, and a wordless distance between them, cold and unmistakable. One evening, while Michael was in the shower, his phone buzzed softly on the table. A message lit up. "Sleep well. Today was amazing." No name saved, just a number. Emma glanced at it. She didn't touch the phone, but the words stayed with her, each one replaying like tiny needles pressing slowly into her chest. She wasn't jealous. She didn't accuse him. She just waited for an explanation. But when she asked in the calmest voice she could manage, Michael didn't turn to look at her. He just sighed and shook his head. "I'm tired. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be." That sentence, more than a confession, was a verdict. because if everything were simple, he wouldn't have dodged it. And if he still loved her, being tired would never be a reason to avoid giving an answer. Emma didn't say another word, but from that moment on, she began to withdraw. No more regular dinners, no more questions about his day, no more trying to make conversation. She didn't sulk, didn't act out. She just went quiet. Saturday morning, they sat across from each other at Cafe Willow, a small spot near downtown. The place was quiet, soft jazz playing, and the air carried the faint smell of cinnamon waffles. Neither of them ordered anything new. Michael stuck to his usual espresso. Emma had black tea, no sugar. He set his cup down, eyes fixed on the table. I think we need some space. Emma didn't look surprised. She'd been waiting for this. The words didn't hurt. They simply confirmed what she already knew. But she still asked. Just one question. Soft, but sharp like a needle twisting through the space between them. Is it because of Victoria? Michael didn't answer. No nod. No denial. He just looked at her, then looked away. And in that silence, Emma had all the truth she needed. She took a sip of her tea, set the cup down slowly, then looked out the window. The sun was gentle that day, a few leaves drifting across the glass. Everything outside looked normal. But inside, something was falling apart. Not loud, not chaotic, just quiet, like someone had dropped something precious and didn't bother to pick it up. They left the cafe without saying another word. A week later, Michael sent over the divorce papers. No explanation, no property dispute, no demands. Everything was prepped and ready, just needed a signature. Clean, cold, and painfully tidy, like someone clearing the scene of a departure long planned. Emma didn't cry when she held the papers. She skimmed through, set them on the table, then went to the lawyer's office and signed them herself. No mediation, no final talk. No, let's try again. No, I'm sorry I hurt you. It felt like a transaction. But this time, what was being transferred wasn't assets. It was years of shared life, severed cleanly with a few strokes of ink. A week after the divorce was finalized, Emma left Austin. She didn't tell her friends, didn't message her old co-workers. She just packed up her things, rented a pickup truck, and drove through the night to Portland, Oregon, a place she'd visited once years ago and had said, if I ever need to start over, this is where I'll go. Her new apartment was near Lake Oswego, small, quiet, and almost an hour outside the city. The landlord was a widowed woman who didn't ask too many questions. Emma paid 3 months' rent up front, changed her phone number, canceled her old email, and deleted all her social media. She cut off every way Michael might reach her. Not out of hate, but because there was no reason left to stay connected to someone who had already chosen to leave. Every morning, Emma woke up at 6, made coffee with the old machine she brought from Austin, and sat on the balcony watching the fog settle over the lake. No one made coffee for her anymore. No notes left on the table. But she didn't feel empty. Just light. A strange feeling that came from losing something that once felt like her whole world, only to realize she could still breathe. She spent the first few weeks resting, not trying to stay busy to forget, not throwing herself into work, just quietly watching how she responded to the absence of someone who had once been everything. And in that silence, she realized, the pain didn't come from being left. It came from being replaced. So easily, so quickly. As if the 10 years they'd shared were just a side chapter in the life of someone she once believed would walk with her to the very end. One evening, while sorting through old paperwork, Emma came across a photo of them taken just before their wedding. She looked into her own eyes in the picture, eyes full of hope. Then she looked at her reflection in the mirror, quieter, heavier, but more honest. She put the photo back in the box. Didn't throw it away, but didn't leave it somewhere easy to find. It was just a chapter closed. Emma enrolled in a therapy program at Hope Mind Clinic, a community mental health center on the outskirts of Portland. At the first session, she didn't speak. She just listened. She sat among strangers, each carrying a different reason for their pain. Someone had lost a child, someone had survived abuse, someone didn't know why they were sad. And Emma, she was the one who had loved too much. After 3 weeks, she began to speak, not about Michael, but about herself. About giving up school to support her husband's career. About all the times she told herself, if he's okay, I'll be okay. About the quiet sacrifices that had become routine. And about how, somewhere along the way, She forgot who she was while trying so hard to keep someone else from leaving. In those sessions, Emma realized she didn't want to do nails forever. Not because the work was beneath her, but because it had never been her choice. She applied to a local community college and enrolled in a psychology program, not to save others, but to understand herself, to find the language to name the things that once kept her silent. She started writing, 1 page each night, not a diary, but questions. What part of me once believed that love meant enduring? How do I learn to love without losing myself? If I could speak to my 22-year-old self, what would I say? Day by day, Emma stopped waiting for messages. She stopped dreaming about the past. She stopped wondering how he was doing. She didn't need to know, because the most important thing was that after everything, she had finally found her way back to herself. And while Emma was slowly becoming whole again, somewhere else, 3 time zones away from Portland, Michael was living the life he once believed was a reward. But like anything that looks perfect on the surface, the real cost never comes printed on the label. Michael moved to New York just weeks after the divorce. Victoria handled everything. An SUV picked him up from the airport and drove him straight to a penthouse on the top floor of a glass tower in Manhattan, the kind of place he used to only see in Forbes or Architectural Digest. Everything there was expensive, quiet, polished, and emotionless. They started traveling almost immediately. Italy, Japan, the Maldives, a string of 5-star hotels, rare wines, beach photos from private resorts, dinners served by Michelin-starred chefs. Michael wore designer clothes, sat in first class, and was introduced at exclusive networking events as Victoria's close associate. But he was never asked to speak. Just stand beside her, nod politely, play the silent role in a world of bright lights and loud voices. He left his old job in Austin. He didn't have a choice. Victoria never said it outright, but she made it clear in her own way. You don't need to work anymore. I've got it covered. At first, it sounded like care. Later, it felt like a leash. Michael no longer had his own bank account. Every expense had to go through Victoria's assistant, a sharp, icy woman named Harper, who communicated strictly in clipped, command-filled emails. The first time Michael realized how dependent he'd become was when he tried to send flowers to an old friend who had just lost their mother. He had no card, no banking app, no way to do even the smallest act without asking for permission. Harper replied, "I'll inform Miss Stone. We'll assess an appropriate budget for this request." Old friends started avoiding him. A few were blunt. "I'm not judging your lifestyle, but I can't sit across the table from someone who sold himself to live it." The messages slowed, the check-ins stopped altogether. Michael was left with only the connections Victoria had built around him, people who knew him as Miss Stone's man and treated him accordingly. He began to feel like a stranger in the place he lived. The penthouse spanned nearly 400 square meters, but not a single corner felt like his own. Every painting on the wall, every wine glass, every pillow was chosen to match Victoria's taste. Once he suggested getting a small bookshelf for some detective novels he loved. She smiled faintly. "You have time to read?" Michael got used to staying quiet. Staying silent during Victoria's Zoom meetings, keeping his personal ideas to himself at dinners with her business partners, not offering an opinion when she asked, "What do you think about moving to the penthouse by the Hudson?" Because the only correct answer was always, "Whatever you want." Little by little, he stopped recognizing himself. He had once managed teams, presented to boards, stood firm on his own values. Now he was part of the decor. A man who fit neatly into a tuxedo, who knew how to smile on cue and when to disappear into silence. One night, they threw a private party at the penthouse, over 30 guests, wine flowing like water, music pounding until sunrise. Michael stood on the balcony, far from the noise, a full glass of wine still untouched in his hand. Victoria walked over, slightly drunk, cigarette unlit between her fingers. She looked at him and smiled like she was admiring something she owned. "You know, you're a luxury item, beautiful, polished, and worth showing off. But remember, I never keep anything forever." Michael looked at her, but said nothing. Yet in that moment, something inside him cracked. Not because of what she said, but because he realized, for the first time in his life, he had become the cheapest version of himself, living in the most expensive setting he'd ever known. Fellas, if you've made it this far, see a bit of yourself in this story? Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Just give a quiet nod, so we both know you're still awake before it's too late. 2 weeks after that party, Michael got a message from Harper at 7 a.m. Miss Stone requests that you vacate the apartment by 6 p.m. today. Personal belongings will be packed and sent later. Do not return. No call, no warning, no explanation. He tried calling, no answer. Texted, no reply. The building's front desk had been instructed not to let him in. Victoria's personal assistant refused to respond to any inquiries. One old colleague whispered over the phone, "Best thing you can do is get out of New York. Nobody here's going to cross her." Michael had no apartment, no bank account, no ID. Everything was in Victoria's name. Even the phone he was using had been issued by her. Overnight, he became homeless, powerless, nameless in every sense of the word. He flew back to Austin with the last bit of cash in his wallet. Just enough for a basic economy ticket, no checked baggage. He checked into a cheap motel off 6th Street, the kind of place where strangers don't ask each other's names. The room smelled of mildew, the AC rattled like it was choking, and the window faced nothing but a blank concrete wall. Michael had nothing left, and no one to text. He started looking for work, sending emails, submitting resumes, calling old contacts. But his reputation beat him to every conversation. Whispers followed. The guy who lived off a woman got kicked out for being untrustworthy, Victoria Stone's glorified lapdog. It was enough to get every door closed in his face. No one wanted to be associated with a man once seen as a luxury accessory, then discarded in public. Every day, he drank coffee from a plastic cup, sat in a cheap bakery, opened his old laptop, and scrolled through job listings. With each passing week, his bank balance crept closer to zero. Then one afternoon, while waiting for an interview for an admin position at a small office, he glanced at his old phone and came across a post. An image from a community mental health seminar at Rosewood Library. The event host, Emma Hart, community mental health counselor. He froze, stared at it for a long time. He didn't text, didn't call, didn't look her up on social media. He just saved the address, and the next morning he went to that library. A 3-story red brick building, old but warm, sat quietly in a residential neighborhood. Nothing fancy, nothing showy, but it had something Michael hadn't felt in a long time. It felt real. He stepped into the lobby, heart heavy and slow. At the end of the hallway, she was standing with a group of older women, probably her weekly support group. Her hair was longer, tied back simply. Her clothes were plain. Her eyes weren't sad anymore, just calm, like someone who had finally made peace with what couldn't be changed. He waited until she finished speaking, then walked toward her. He didn't say anything until she turned and saw him. Their eyes met. No surprise, no awkwardness, just a long, quiet look, enough to recognize, enough to remember. Michael spoke softly, voice low and steady. "I just came to say I'm sorry, not to be forgiven." Emma didn't say a word. She didn't turn away, but she didn't move toward him either. She simply gave a small nod, acknowledging that the apology had arrived. At the right place, at the right time. No one said anything more. And maybe nothing else needed to be said. Because some mistakes can't be fixed. They can only be owned, shouldered quietly, and carried forward as a lesson never to repeat. Michael stood there, silent, like someone who had just stepped out of an old dream, the very one he had chosen to abandon. He didn't explain, didn't defend himself, didn't ask for another chance. He just looked at her, as if trying to see whether the woman standing before him was still the same wife who once waited for him every night, with a cooling meal on the table and a smile that never wore out. Emma looked back, at a man who once made her feel safe, now thinner, older, and unmoored. The face was familiar, but the eyes no longer held the quiet confidence that once made her believe they'd last forever. Now they held only regret and exhaustion. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, didn't look away. She simply stood there, facing him, like someone who had finally found her way back to herself after a long-lost journey. "No need to apologize again," she said, voice steady, like reading a note from a notebook. "I forgave you a long time ago, but there's no part of the past still intact for you to return to." Michael gave a small nod. It was an answer that couldn't be argued. No blame, no bitterness, just a truth. Simple, cold, and sharp enough to hurt. He turned and walked away. each step slow, heavy, worn, like the memories he'd let slip through his life. The door closed behind him without a sound. No one watched him go. No one asked him to stay. Emma returned to the group room. She picked up where the session had left off. A young woman was speaking about her alcoholic father, and a man shared how he couldn't forgive himself after his marriage collapsed. Emma listened, took notes, nodded, asked the right questions at the right moments. Her face no longer showed cracks, just the quiet presence of someone who had walked through pain and no longer feared it. The afternoon ended with golden light spilling in through the window. She stayed behind, alone, tidying the chairs, gathering the files, placing the folders neatly on the shelf. One hand brushed the edge of the table, once the spot where she used to sit, waiting for Michael to come pick her up. No one was coming now. But she didn't need to wait anymore. In that quiet moment, memories resurfaced. The times she cooked dinner and checked the clock every 5 minutes. The nights he came home late without a word. The moments she walked into the bedroom and saw his back turned to her, cold as the wall growing between them. There was a time she cried when he walked out the door without looking back, but now she didn't cry, because the deepest loss had happened long ago. She just hadn't been brave enough then to name it. She closed the library, stepped out, and walked through the small park by the lake. The breeze was gentle, leaves drifted down. A little girl ran past and waved. She smiled and waved back, her hand steady, no longer trembling like it had the day she signed the divorce papers. Everything was different now. Not because of time, but because at last she had chosen herself. If you were Emma, would you choose to forgive? Would you walk away in silence like she did? Or open your arms one more time, even after everything had already shattered? This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about self-worth. When there's no one left to remind you of it but yourself. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in. It means letting yourself move forward without carrying the weight of anger. If you've ever been through something like this, or if you're standing at that edge between staying and leaving, drop a comment. I want to hear your story. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because there's so much more we haven't said yet, and you won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening.